So we're in the home stretch. This is episode 3 on what I do when I stand up a new environment, and we're going to be covering the database specific configurations that I make changes to. Same disclaimers previous 2 episodes that this is not law. This is not necessarily even best practice. This is what I've done from my own experience over time to a brand new server that is presented to me. This can come from my own experiences or best practices or talking to other DBAs, but this is what I do. So take it with a grain of salt. When we're at the database environment level, we've got a lot of little switches to play with. Matter of fact, this episode is going to be slightly longer than I like because we are at a granular level, and I have to stop and warn you, hey, watch out changing A because it could affect B. But we're basically hitting 4 main areas: the database configuration, turning off the health monitor, creating the explain tables for future use, and revoking public access. Now, specifically at the database level configuration, I take a little bit of time because we're addressing a few different areas. We're going to tell the database not to restart itself automatically. We're going to play with the package cache size. I'm going to explain why. We're going to make the initial logging changes that I like to see when I light up a database for the first time. And I'm going to turn on archive logging so I have the ability to restore from a backup to a specific point in time. So in this last episode, we're going to be covering 4 areas I like to tidy up when I get a brand new box. That's adjusting some configurations at the database level, shutting down the health monitor, creating explain tables, and revoking implicit public access. The database configuration changes are going to be very similar to what we did in the last episode. Matter of fact, they are so similar, I'm going to only show you one change by command line, and then I will show you a list of things that I try to address, and we'll talk about them a little bit. To look at what's currently set for the database configuration, you issue db2 get dbcfg for sample or for your database. A couple things here. One, if you've issued an explicit connect statement, that is connect to sample, you can then type get dbcfg and it will show you. I do not like this method because of how things are connected when you try to do updates and what will happen immediately and what won't. So I always try to default to the full command. I'm also going to more this, show it to you page by page to show you that a lot more is covered here than in the database manager. There are a lot more switches you can flip. I have 1 page, 2 page, 3 page, 4 pages devoted to anything from memory to how locking is done to automatic maintenance to how my logging is approached to restarting the database. There's a ton here to deal with. The first one that I'm going to address, well actually there are a couple things I'm going to address. I'm going to shut off how we auto restart the database. I'm going to adjust the package cache size. I'm going to turn off auto maintenance, and I'm going to turn on the ability to have archive logging. So to make my first adjustment, let's take a look at the auto restart parameter. It's exactly what I told you before. Matter of fact, I'm just going to command line recall, and I'm going to grep the parameter I want. Auto restart. Right now you see it's set to on. Before we shut off the DB2 instance auto restart. That was at the database manager configuration level. Now we're actually dealing with the database, not the instance. I like to have control over that. So to make the changes is db2 update dbcfg for sample using the parameter name, which is auto restart, and then what you want to set it to. Pretty simple. Go ahead and hit go. But remember what happened with the DBM config in the previous episode. Sometimes it looked like it started immediately and sometimes it didn't. So if I actually did a grep, it shows off. But is that true? Let's go ahead and issue a connect to the database and then change this command to have show detail. So db2 connect to dbcfg. Ugh, I'm already 2 steps ahead. Sample. Let's connect to the database. Now, what I was showing you before, Let's add show detail. This will show you what it believes it should set itself to after a restart. Awesome, they're both off, which means that my change happened immediately. If I saw that this was on and this one was off, that meant it understood it needs to be off, but that won't happen until after we shut down and restart the database. So let's take a look at the other things I'm going to address. I'm going to show you individual commands here, but I do have a script that I'm going to pass on to you guys. First is disable the auto restart, which I showed you here. Auto restart is the parameter we're adjusting. The next is the package cache size. This could be an episode in its own, but what I'm going to relay is that this is usually set to some sort of formula or automatic. And if you're unfamiliar with package cache, this is where DB2 caches the path it understands it needs to follow to get to the data. So if it sees the SQL coming in a second time, instead of recompiling, it pulls its old plan, goes out and gets the data, and it's a lot faster. The problem is, if you don't have a lot of uniform SQL or you got a bunch of dynamic SQL coming in, it can keep storing new paths over and over and over and over in this cache, and the cache can just grow exponentially and get out of control. Sounds awesome until you're dealing with a package cache that's going into gigs of space. So I am actually hard setting it. And what I want to make very, very clear is that this is just a starting point. I almost always change from this setting, but my initial setting is 8192 pages. The next area I go into is automatic maintenance. I shut off automatic maintenance for a few reasons. One, I often lean on my own scripts, and I'd rather not configure DB2 to have to pay attention to everything. However, there are one or two sometimes I will use, especially around run stats. But initially, I shut everything off so I have control over what's going off when with my own scripts, and this also lays some of the groundwork for shutting off the health monitor. But if you want to completely shut off auto maintenance, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different parameters that need to be shut off. Now let's go over into logging. Do you remember what I mentioned in an earlier episode that I like to separate file systems to different duties? I don't want my active logs, the logs that are actively being written by DB2, I do not want those mingling with where my data is. So I create a new log path and shove them off somewhere else. If I decide to turn on archive logging, which allows me to do an a restore to a specific point in time, I set another log file system. So my data is separate from my active logs, is separate from my archive logs. But in the beginning, I am always going to set where my new active logs are going to go. I set a basic log file size and a general number of primary logs that it's going to try to use as it works. You can go and set secondary logs to roll over to when you're starting to do things like archive logging. Matter of fact, to do archive logging, you're going to set up your log secondary logs to go beyond your 15 if they fill up. We're going to tell it, hey, go ahead and turn on log archiving. You're going to shove your logs over here and keep them for a predetermined amount of time where I have another script that cleans them up after so many days. And I want to compress my logs, my archive logs. So, because your archive log directory can get really unbearable if you're holding on to 7, 10, 14 days worth of transaction logs. So that about addresses what I want to do, and you can issue each one of these commands if you want, but I'm also going to provide a link for a script that I ended up creating for you all. So let's pull up the script. It's very similar to the other one. It's update DB preferences, and let's take a quick look at it. You're going to find that it's going to warn you, hey, not only are you about to make changes to your database, but be careful because I'm going to force everything off, bring everything down, and take it offline while I do a backup real quick. Then it's going to go through and actually make the changes for you, and you can go in here and edit this as you see fit, adding or taking away what you think you need to do. So let's go ahead and run it. Pretty simple command, and then the sample or database name. First thing it asks you is, hey, you're about to do something stupid. Are you sure you want to proceed and mess things up? Yes. Now it's going to go through and address each item from the auto restart to auto maintenance. Now I want you to pay attention to what's happening down here at the very, very end. Notice that it tried to take a backup to the database. When you convert to archive logging, when you give yourself the ability to restore to a point in time, it will lock everything down until you take an initial backup. I don't care about that initial backup. I haven't done anything yet. So go ahead and throw it to dev null, the bit bucket, the delete file. I don't care. Just back it up and throw it away. And that's exactly what happens. And at the bottom, it's going to tell you, hey, I made all those changes. I turned everything off and on, but you may want to go out there and make sure everything looks okay. All right, kids, I'm going to pause here for a second and talk to you about the health monitor, which we're about to go shut off. This is deprecated. So why am I showing you something that is deprecated? Well, one, deprecated means it's just not being worked on. It doesn't mean it's been removed. Therefore, it is still there and the functionality probably still needs to be shut off. Two, deprecation happened in 9.7, which didn't go out of support until just a few months ago at the time of this filming. So there are still environments out there that are running around with this feature. And finally, what drives me bat crap crazy is the fact that there is a parameter at the database manager configuration level. We actually covered it before that says health monitor, and you turn it to off. You would think that would shut it off. It doesn't. To completely bring this thing down, you have to adjust over 20 parameters. And you've got to be careful on if you want to do that or not, because 3 of those parameters have to do around automatic maintenance of reorg backups and run stats, one of the ones I just showed you. So it sounds a little complicated, but it really isn't. I'm going to go ahead and just show you how to do it in one fell swoop in a script because there are so many little moving pieces. So let's go back to the command line. So as I mentioned, the health monitor has quite a few parameters that need to be shut off. Here's a complete list, and I'm trying to work from the top down. So we're starting with the DBM CFG, the Database Manager Configuration level. We actually went and turned those off, or turned that off in one of the very first episodes. The next phase is shutting off automatic maintenance, and those are at the database level. We're going to go through and shut every one of those off. And then we have to set off basically alerting for each of these databases for all the different possible monitors that we could have. I've actually never even dealt with these before until I ran across Health Monitor. And there is a Technote, there is a web page you can go to that says for you to completely shut it off, you need to go and do every one of these. Now, I'll include that in the episode notes, but it's also in the script I'm about to give you. Let me pull up the script. Disable Health Monitor. You know what I need to do first? I need to make those all executable. I'm going to run into a problem later. That's something for you if you're not familiar with it. When you create your corn shell initially, you need to set the permissions and open them up a little. So let's take a look at the health monitor. Take a look here in the execution notes. Go to this website. It will tell you exactly what's going on. And if you are going to be doing automatic maintenance, you need to avoid running the commands around reorg, run stats, backup, table maintenance. Those all still need to be left on, otherwise you'll lose that ability. Otherwise, you can shut everything off. Again, the script is going to go through and tell you, hey, dummy, you're about to be changing things. Are you sure you want to do this? In this case, it's going to have to force off the connections and restart everything, the DB2 environment and the database, because we are changing at that configuration level. It'll then go through and make all the changes for you and restart. So let's go ahead and execute it. Whoa, copied the wrong thing from that script, didn't I? Let me pull the script name again. Hey, you sure you want to do this? You're about to blow things up. Yep. Wham! It goes through and does everything. Notice at the bottom right here, we're stopping because I'm forcing the connections and I'm starting everything over again. I just don't have the actual back-end work coming out the screen, so it just pauses there for a second. It's not broken. But we'll go up to the very top. Notice adjust the DBM CFG, adjust the DB CFG, and then go shut off all the alerts. Once this is done and you restart everything, your health monitor should be completely off. All right, we've updated database parameters. We shut off the health monitor. Next thing, create the explain tables. This is very, very easy to do, and the explain tables are used by DB2 to house information that it needs as it works through some of your utilities that you use to analyze SQL or come up with indexes. So the old way that I have been doing forever and just stopped is to go to the SQL lib. So I'm going to go to my db2 inst1 home directory and go to the SQL lib, and I'm going to go to miss. And in here is explain DDL. If you are inst1, if you're the instance name, you can issue db2-tvf and hit go. And it is just going to roll through this long DDL creating tables for you, and boom, you're done. However, the more modern way that we should be going to do this is through a sysproc. To do this, you issue this command. Basically, sysinstall objects, the explain table. We're going to create them. One thing I'm going to point out over here at the very end, I don't remember what this null is, but this last null, if in single quotes you put a username, say the name of a developer that has access to this box, it'll create the tables for them to use if they want to use the DB2 explain or advise facilities. We're not going to use it here. Once I do this, I just hit go and it creates them. It's pretty good. I'm going to end up providing you a script that will do this as well, but I'm just going to hit enter here. Oh, hey, how about we connect to that database first? What do you think there, big guy? Connect to sample. Well, let's call up sysproc. And it's running, return status 0. All the tables exist. If I went in there and did a select against the syscat.tables and looked for a schema or a table of like explain, you'll see a bunch of them pop up. Pretty easy, right? Single command. We're almost there, folks. Last phase, revoking implicit access to public. Upon database creation, public gets some native access. And for the most part, it's harmless. However, I like to personally go remove it, just as best practice. If I didn't explicitly give it to you, I don't want you to have it. And these 5 commands here will remove that access public got right upon database creation. Now, notice up here, I have create database and then restrictive. The create database command has a ton of parameters, right? Your actual command could be pretty long, but I always end it with restrictive. And when I do that, it will create the database and leave public completely out of it. It basically says, understood, I'll do what you want me to do. I'll create this database over here. I am not going to give initial access to anybody, not even public, even if it seems benign. Now, there's a gentleman out there named Bjorhovde. He's a gold consultant. He's spoken at iDoug, written a couple articles. I've actually sat in on one of his iDoug presentations around security, and he brought up the argument that restrictive sounds great, but sometimes it can be too restrictive. And you will find a little later on when you're trying to do a basic bind or some other simple command that DB2 is going to give you the finger and tell you no. And that's because public was never given that access. So after seeing it both ways, and I will tell you, I have definitely seen the argument that he gave. I still like using restrictive. I found that, yeah, I may run into a problem here or there and I have to work around it and grant something explicitly, but I prefer to not give public anything. To pull back what public has, these are the 5 statements I would use. There may be more if you've been established any length of time. However, if you issue these after connecting to the database, it will take back what was initially given. But I went and made a script that should help you do this a little bit. All right, kids, I need to stop here for a second and give a public service announcement. Pay attention. I don't care if you're about to use the script that I'm going to cover here or you issue these 5 commands individually. Pay attention to when you're initiating them. If this is a brand new database straight out of the box, you've just been given the server, no problem, go ahead and issue it. If your database has existed any length of time and you have applications and you have users and they've been using it for a little bit, be careful. If you start revoking this stuff, you could accidentally have a ripple effect and not know it. And where I've seen this come into play is if my database is a back end to some sort of tool. That tool was database agnostic and is depending on public access that was given at database creation. If you pull it now, all of a sudden the tool breaks. So, before you move forward, do this in a lower level environment and test the hell out of it, or you may run the risk of causing a problem as you move up through environments or even load it in production. All right, we cool? Don't break stuff. Let's go back to the command line. So revoking from public is pretty easy. First thing, if you want to do it by command line, is connect to the database and then issue the revoke statement in quotes. Not with the semicolon that you see up there because that's for a script. Once it's done, it immediately takes effect. Now, I'm going to show you how to do this with my script, so I need to give that access back. Now access has been regranted. I'm going to clean everything up. I'm going to show you our script. Script is pretty self-explanatory. It's basically going to say, hey, be careful, don't go do this, you're going to screw with authorities, are you sure you want to? Yes, okay, good, I'm going to go break stuff. Pretty easy. One of the things that it is going to stop here and say is if you've already got an existing database, be careful because you may have different tools or users already taking advantage of this public access that was automatically granted. So be careful and test. Just what I told you in that PSA. So let's go ahead and run it. Hey, you sure you want to break your stuff? Yep. Revoke commands are issued, automatically done, script is complete. So that's it. We've covered messing around with the database configs. We've talked about shutting off the health monitor. We created explain tables. And we went and removed implicit access to the database for public. That's it, the whole enchilada. Over the past 3 episodes, we've covered everything that I have done each time I set up a new environment. So hopefully you will find this useful, and I look forward to seeing you in our next episode.